Coming up on this week's 7 Days of Science, scientists practice the art of science, science is carried out by scientists, and some scientists take a look at doing some science. Starting off the news this week, scientists think they have solved one of the major problems we had with models simulating the formation of the supermassive black holes that sit at the centre of most galaxies. Publishing their work in the journal Physical Review Letters, the researchers say they have solved the final parsec problem. This issue cropped up when the formation of supermassive black holes was simulated. These are thought to form when smaller black holes merge together, sometimes when two galaxies collide and their central black holes are pulled into each other's orbits. As the orbits slowly force the black holes to get closer and closer, previous calculations saw dark matter particles being ejected from the area around the black holes. This sudden absence of dark matter meant that there was no longer enough energy drawn from the black holes to complete the merger, and so they remained at a distance of roughly a parsec, hence why it was referred to as the final parsec problem. The researchers of this new paper created a model where dark matter particles don't fully disperse, instead remaining dense enough for the two merging black holes to complete their merger. The team do admit that the way they have suggested dark matter particles interact with each other is an assumption, and not all theoretical models of how dark matter works have this element within them. The researchers argue that this is the only way that these models can solve the final parsec problem. A massively interesting study nonetheless, and it will be exciting to see how the rest of the scientific community react to this new paper and whether or not it becomes adopted into other models and theories. In other news, a fascinating study was published this week in the journal Current Biology, which has taken a look at chimpanzee conversation and found that it is remarkably similar to our own. Now, perhaps luckily, they're not saying that chimpanzees speak the same language as us or even use a verbal language like ours at all, but they still communicate, mostly through hand movements and facial expressions. Upon analysing this communication, the researchers were surprised to find that their conversation was rather fast-paced, taking turns between their gesturing and communicating with one another with a similar time between these communications than that of humans. This fast-paced communication has previously been identified as somewhat of a mark of human conversation, which transcended cultural boundaries, although I must note that there are interesting differences within this fast-paced conversation throughout different cultures. To see chimpanzees exhibit the same behaviour is particularly fascinating. They were even seen to interrupt each other during their conversations, just like humans. This newfound similarity points towards somewhat of an underlying rule in animal communication. Whether this comes from a shared ancestry or is a convergent communicative strategy is yet unknown, but we thoroughly hope that more studies in the future will be published that take a look at animal communication with this in mind. It's a really cool discovery that reminds us both how much we share with the animal kingdom and how much of even modern day life adheres to our natural inheritance. Some more space news now, but we're going to be a little bit closer to home than supermassive black holes. This week, NASA published images of pure crystallized sulphur on Mars, taken by the Curiosity rover. Curiosity was launched all the way back in 2012 and had a 2-year mission, which was eventually extended indefinitely. It has provided us with some truly captivating information about Mars during its time, and these images are the latest of many that it has taken on its slow journey across the surface. One NASA researcher commented that this collection of rocks that house the crystallized sulphur shouldn't be there, in accordance with what we currently know about the geology of the area. You may notice from the pictures that they look a little bit crushed up, and unfortunately the reason for that isn't natural. Before taking these images, Curiosity ran over the rocks, cracking them open, which I suppose is fairly useful in seeing what's inside. It's an exciting discovery, and scientists will now have to re-evaluate the region to understand how this pure sulphur formed. It may seem like a setback, but that's what Curiosity is there for, taking these close-up images and gathering as much data as possible to help expand our understanding of Mars and the rest of the universe. Also in the news, it has been reported that 2 young orcas have rammed a sailboat off the coast of Brittany. The 12-metre long sailboat had its rudder broken and had to be towed back to the harbour in Glyptodont, France. This is not the first time a sailboat has been damaged by orcas in this way. The Iberian subpopulation of orcas, which the IUCN classifies as endangered, has been interacting with sailboats since July 2020. To date, there have been around 700 interactions, roughly half of which caused mild to serious damage to the boats. Some boats have sunk, while others, like this one, have been disabled and had to be towed back to land. These orcas live in the coastal waters of the Iberian Peninsula and have had interactions with boats along the Atlantic and Mediterranean coasts of Europe and North Africa. This interaction is a little different, in that it is 800 miles north of the area where these orcas usually hang out. Whilst it is undoubtedly scary to have one's boat damaged by such a large animal, it is important to highlight that at no time have any of these amazing creatures hurt a person. The general consensus amongst experts is that the orcas are playing. They almost always target the rudder, damaging it so much that the boat cannot be steered. They even break it off. Once the rudder is broken, they tend to lose interest and move off, perhaps in search of other amusement. First up in the paleontology news for this week is the report that the largest and most complete known skeleton of a Stegosaurus, a specimen named Apex, has been auctioned for the record-breaking price of $44.6 million. This is the most that a dinosaur has ever been sold for, breaking the previous record held by Stan the T-Rex, which sold for $31.8 million back in 2020. Originally unearthed in May of 2022, Apex was sold at a Sotheby's auction in New York City and has been bought by the billionaire hedge fund owner Ken Griffin. Fortunately, he has implied that he intends to loan the specimen to a US institution, so this spectacular fossil will hopefully be available to science. However, it is still setting a worrying precedent that fossils can be sold for such extreme amounts of money, and it's not guaranteed that dinosaurs sold in future auctions won't disappear into private collections. A new species of dinosaur has also been named this week. It was discovered in China in rocks dating to between 84 to 72 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period. It's a new kind of troodontid theropod dinosaur and is named Urbacodon norelli. Only the species is new, however, with the genus Urbacodon known from another species named in 2007 that was unearthed in Uzbekistan. Urbacodon norelli is known from a fragment of the lower right jaw preserved with several teeth, which shows various anatomical features enabling it to be distinguished from other troodontids. The paleontologists were also able to investigate the tooth replacement patterns of these dinosaurs thanks to the fossil, showing that they had an alternating tooth replacement pattern, which meant that the significant gaps in the tooth row could be avoided as neighbouring functional teeth were not lost at the same time. So, a great new species that adds to our record of these dinosaurs' diversity, as well as our understanding of their tooth paleobiology. This last week also saw the naming of a new species of prehistoric crocodilomorph from a formation in Germany dating to just after 140 million years ago. It's named Analioetes schroederi, and it's a kind of crocodilomorph known as a metriorhynchid, a lineage of crocs that became extremely well adapted to life in the water, even losing their armoured scales and evolving paddle-like limbs. Analioetes has been named based on an incredible fossil that's actually the most complete metriorhynchid skull known from the Cretaceous period, preserving a good deal of the snout and most of the cranium. The skull has actually been known since about the early 20th century, and various studies have referred to it over the years. However, it has only now been given a proper, valid scientific name and thorough description. Not only is this a spectacular skull with many interesting internal structures preserved, but it's also one of the geologically youngest occurrences of metriorhynchids, as these crocs appear to have died out about 125 million years ago. They're also generally rare in the early Cretaceous when Analioetes lived, so it's a significant species that improves our understanding of their diversity at this time. Another very interesting study published this week has investigated the late Cretaceous aged fish beds of Lebanon, a series of sites that yield some extraordinary fossils of prehistoric fish, as well as invertebrates, marine reptiles, and even pterosaurs. These fossils are so striking that there's actually historical documentation of people finding them that goes back as far as the time of the Roman Empire, when the rocks were quarried for building stone. These Lebanese fossils are highly valued by modern collectors and can often be found at fossil fairs and in museum collections around the world today. However, a detailed review of the environments and ancient ecologies represented by these rocks has been lacking. This research therefore brings together what we know about these fossils, how they were preserved, and what sort of habitats they lived in, as well as investigating what role scientific colonialism has had on Lebanon. They found that Lebanese researchers have generally not been included on publications about Lebanese fossils, and highlighted the fact that most of the fossils from here that form the basis of new species are not stored in the country. They also suggest ideas for some of the future studies that could be undertaken on these sites and their spectacular fossils, and encourage more collaboration with Lebanese paleontologists to develop the science locally. Also in the news this week, paleontologists have discovered more evidence of ancient humans in South America hunting Glyptodonts, ancient prehistoric armadillos. The fossils of this Glyptodont, a species called Neosclerocalyptus, were unearthed in Argentina and comprise several tail vertebrae, the tail armour, pieces of the hips, and fragments of the carapace. Various different types of cut marks were identified on these remains that can only be explained by human butchering, suggesting that the ancient people were cutting up these animals for their meat. Although evidence of human Glyptodont interactions has been previously found, radiocarbon dating of this specimen yielded an age of about 21,100 and 20,800 years ago, making this the oldest known instance of humans interacting with megafauna in South America by about 6,000 years. Not only that, but it also contributes to the building evidence suggesting the peopling of South America occurred thousands of years earlier than previously estimated, likely occurring between 20 to 30,000 years ago. So lots of fascinating insight into the past has been gained from this remarkable specimen. And finally for the news this week, a very interesting paper has been published discussing the evidence for Neanderthals having a sense of aesthetics. This sense is defined in the study as being a taste for the creation and/or appreciation of that which strikes one as, e.g., attractive or awesome, and it's often been assumed to be something unique to Homo sapiens. However, the researchers argue that the evidence is now too strong to deny that Neanderthals also had this capability. They point to discoveries such as personal ornaments created by these ancient people from teeth and bones, as well as apparent jewellery made from eagle talons, engravings made by Neanderthals, and also their use of pigments. One particularly fascinating example is a tiny fossil shell found in a cave in Italy that was inhabited by Neanderthals. This shell was coloured by a pigment and must have been carried over a huge distance, as the nearest fossil exposures producing that type of shell is over 100 kilometres from that cave, so clearly these people considered the colourful shell worth transporting. The paper also highlights the evidence for a proto-aesthetic sense in the common ancestors of both Neanderthals and our species, as the creators of the Acheulean archaeological industry modified how they made hand axes over time with clear shifts as they made them to be more symmetrical, despite more asymmetrical designs still being functional. And there's even an Acheulean hand axe that was specifically crafted to include a fossil shell on one of the faces. So both our species and Neanderthals seem to have inherited this sense of aesthetics from these older hominins. The paper ends by suggesting some future research avenues to further investigate this fascinating aspect of Neanderthals, while also cautioning that we shouldn't assume these people were exactly the same as us and would have had precisely the same aesthetic tastes. Rather, Neanderthal aesthetics should be investigated on its own terms. Hopefully, future work can give us a much better sense of how these remarkable people thought and created art. Well, that's it for this week's 7 Days of Science. I do hope you enjoyed, and, as always, we'll see you on Sunday. I really didn't talk to you.